She's a Harvard Law graduate, civil rights lawyer, a dang good one, and best-selling author. She's also a friend of mine, Areva Martin. It is so good to see you despite these horrific circumstances. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, so glad to join you, Sam. Difficult conversation, but one that has to be had.
Agreed. We have uncomfortable conversations on this show. That's what makes this show, I would say, vital for the viewers. So let's get right to it. In your legal opinion, what are the appropriate charges against former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin and the other 3 officers?
I think the appropriate charges for the officer who we saw kneeling on Mr. Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, I think those charges should be second-degree murder. As it relates to those 3 other officers, I think we can expect that they will be charged with aiding and abetting with respect to that second-degree murder. The good news for the family, the good news for activists and protesters, is that the second-degree murder charge in Minnesota carries a 40-year prison term. Unlike that third-degree murder, which was so murky, nobody's ever heard of third-degree murder, not nearly serious enough given the scale and scope of what we witnessed on that video.
Will they end up behind bars, in your opinion?
Absolutely. This is not the kind of case where you're going to see a plea bargain between the Attorney General Ellison in this case and the defendants. I think this is a case the public pressure is so great. The eyes of the world are going to be on that Attorney General. I think this case will go to trial, and hopefully there will be a conviction on all 4 officers.
It's an honor to speak with you, Areva. I'm really happy to do so. I wanted to ask you what this means. The state of Minnesota has done something interesting. They filed a human rights complaint against the Minneapolis Police Department, which gives me chills. What does that mean?
It's really an important thing that was done by the state of Minnesota. It can also be done by the federal government. But basically, they're not going to just look at the conduct of these 4 officers. They're going to go and investigate that entire police department. We know this is a police department that has had years of discriminatory practices against African Americans and people of color in the state of Minnesota. So this civil rights complaint allows an investigator to go in and look at those discriminatory practices and order the police department to make changes.
Wow. And Areva, I admire you so much as an activist, as a civil rights attorney, because in fact, you provide a voice for so many voiceless. So in your opinion, what do you think will be the catalyst? What will stop the protests?
I don't think the protests are going to end. Obviously, they are about the arrest and charging of these 4 officers, and hopefully after today, that will have been accomplished. But the protests are so much bigger than that. They are about the inequities in our criminal justice system. They are about the inequities that exist in our healthcare system, our education system, and our economic system. And people who have taken to the street from all races, all ethnic groups, all ages are saying they want to see an American that is more fair. The protests in Ferguson, responding to the Michael Brown shooting, protesters were on the ground for a solid year in Ferguson. So these protesters aren't going anywhere anytime soon.
Areva, you have a magic wand, let's say, and you can wave it and make systemic changes to U.S. justice system for reform. What changes specifically do you wish you could see?
I think there are a couple of things that can happen, and I've been talking to law enforcement experts, other civil rights attorneys, and people who study these issues, for a living. And what we keep hearing are systemic changes, and that involves training, the way officers are trained, the way officers are recruited, definitely accountability, officers who are engaged in this kind of misconduct being held to account, and that includes criminal prosecution, as we're seeing in the case of Mr. Floyd. And we need to have a change of heart and minds, and you can't legislate changes of hearts and minds, but we can talk about these uncomfortable race issues and hopefully this time move further than we've ever done before in this country.
Yes, and Areva, before we go, just, I adore you, I admire you, not only your talent and your activism, but as a mom. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Sam, and thank you so much for asking. So when you hear Black parents and mothers in particular talk about the talk they have to give their Black son, that talk is made even more challenging for me because my son has autism.
Wow.
So I have to worry about whether my son will respond to a command by a police officer, not so much because he's not complying, but because his cognitive ability may not allow him to appreciate, what that interaction is like with the police. So I worry about that, but I'm hopeful. The protesters around the world, around the globe, are are saying enough is enough, and people are sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Yeah. Wow. Areva, thank you for that. A whole nother layer that, many of us don't think about. So I always learn from you. Our viewers hopefully will learn from you. We appreciate you.